My name is Leila. I am 38 years old, and I was born in Isfahan, Iran, in a city famous for its blue-tiled mosques and its bridges that turn into gathering places in the evening, where families sit on the stone arches above the water and talk for hours about nothing and everything. I grew up in a house that smelled like saffron and cardamom, the middle daughter of a university professor and a woman who had given up her own academic career to raise 3 daughters and who had never, not once in my presence, expressed regret about that choice, though I have thought about it many times since and wondered what the full truth of that was. I left Iran at 26 to do a PhD in environmental engineering at the University of Melbourne, which was the plan my father and I had built together over years of conversations that were really underneath conversations about how to give me a life larger than the one available to women in the country I was born in. I was supposed to finish the degree and come back. I did not come back. And the reason I did not come back is what I want to tell you about, because it is not the story you were probably expecting. 6 months before I was due to finish my PhD, my mother called me from Isfahan on a Saturday morning while I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by the wreckage of my final chapter, and she told me that a man wanted to meet me. His name was Dariush. He was 32, an engineer from a good family in Tehran, the son of my father's colleague. She said he had seen a photograph of me at a conference my father had attended, and he had asked about me, and my father had given a careful and non-committal answer. That was in the language my parents spoke to each other on these matters, which I had grown up learning to translate. An affirmative. I should come home when I finished the degree. There would be a meeting. These things sometimes worked out. I want to be careful here about how I describe what I felt, because I think it is easy for people who did not grow up in this particular cultural system to misunderstand what I was being asked. My parents were not authoritarian people. My father was a professor of literature who had spent my entire childhood encouraging me to ask questions and form opinions and defend them. My mother had opinions about everything and expressed them freely at the dinner table and expected her daughters to do the same. This was not a family that believed in compulsion. What I was being offered was an introduction, a possibility, a door being held open rather than pushed through. I had the right to say no. We all understood that. And yet, I did not say no, not then. Not in that Saturday morning phone call, because I had also grown up understanding that my parents' judgment about people was usually better than mine, that the framework of family-arranged introductions had worked for many people I respected. And because I was 27 and finishing a PhD and living alone in Melbourne, and had been, if I was being honest with myself, quietly lonely in a way that Australian social life had not yet managed to solve, I said I would think about it. My mother heard in my voice what she needed to hear and ended the call with a warmth that told me she was already several steps further along in the plan than I was. I did not think about Dariush much in the weeks that followed, because I was finishing a PhD, and thinking about anything other than the final chapter felt like a form of self-sabotage. I submitted in August. My supervisor, a sharp Australian woman named Dr. Hartley, who had been simultaneously my greatest professional challenge and most useful mentor, took me to dinner to celebrate and told me I should apply for a postdoctoral fellowship that was opening at the university, that my research on water system modeling was exactly what they were looking for, that I should not go home before exploring whether I could build something here. I noted this. I filed it in the same mental folder as the call about Dariush, and I did not yet understand that those two things were going to require a decision. My parents flew to Melbourne in September, the first time they had come since I arrived 3 years earlier. My father walked around the university campus with the expression of a man who is seeing something he is proud of and doing his best not to show how moved he is. My mother bought things for my apartment that she felt were missing, which was most things, and reorganized my kitchen while I watched with a mixture of affection and helplessness that I think is universal to daughters watching their mothers rearrange their homes. It was a good visit. On the last evening, sitting at the dinner table after a meal my mother had cooked from ingredients she had brought in her suitcase from Isfahan, my father told me about Dariush again, more fully this time. The family, the career, the character. As my father assessed it from what he knew, he said, "We are not telling you what to do. We are telling you that we think this person might be worth meeting. The rest is yours." I asked because I needed to ask. What if I want to stay in Melbourne? What if I apply for the fellowship? My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then you stay in Melbourne. These things are not incompatible. He could come here. You could go back. Nothing is decided." He said it gently, and I believed he meant it. And I also heard underneath it the thing parents convey even when they are trying not to, which was that coming home was still the version of this story he was most hoping for. I applied for the fellowship. I was offered it in November. The same week, I received a message on WhatsApp from an Iranian number I didn't recognize that said, in Farsi, "My name is Dariush. My apologies for the directness. I got your number from my father, who got it from yours. You don't have to reply to this. But if you're open to talking, I would like to." I stared at the message for a while. Then I replied, "The directness is fine. I'm open to talking." We talked for 3 months before we met in person, via video call, long conversations that started as cautious and became less so as the weeks went on. He was, and I say this wanting to be fair rather than sentimental about the early period before I knew everything, genuinely good company. He was curious and well-read and had a humor that arrived dry and unexpected in a way I consistently enjoyed. He asked questions about my research that showed he had actually listened to what I had told him about it. He talked about Iran with a complicated love that I recognized because I felt it too. The simultaneous belonging and frustration of being formed by a place that did not always have room for the person you were becoming. We talked about what it would mean for each of us to leave and what it would mean to stay. And I found that we had been running similar calculations from different starting points for years. He came to Melbourne in February. I was nervous in the airport in a way I had not been nervous about a person in a long time, which told me something about how the 3 months of talking had shifted things without my full consent. He was taller than I had expected from the video calls and slightly quieter in person. And when we shook hands, because neither of us was sure what else to do, he looked at me with a directness that felt like relief, like we were both glad to finally be in the same room as the person we had been talking to. We spent 5 days together. I showed him the city. We had long dinners. We walked along the Yarra River one afternoon in the thin Melbourne autumn light and talked about the kind of things you talk about when you are deciding whether a life together is possible, what you need, what you cannot do without, where the edges of yourself are, and how much you are willing to move them. On the last evening, he told me he wanted to move to Melbourne if I would have him, that he had been thinking for a long time about working internationally, and this was a direction he had already been considering before I was part of the picture, that he was not asking me to give anything up for him, that he was asking if there was room for him in the life I was building. I said yes. Not immediately, not that evening. I asked for time and he gave it. And 2 weeks later, I called him and I said yes. We were engaged within the year. My parents came back for the small ceremony we had in Melbourne, and my father shook Darish's hand for a long time in the particular way he shook hands with people he had decided to trust, and my mother cried and reorganized the kitchen again. And it was good. It was genuinely good. And then, 14 months after the wedding, I found out something that rearranged everything I thought I understood about the man I had married. I found out because of a phone call I was not supposed to hear. Darius had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and it rang, and I saw the name on the screen, a woman's name, a name I didn't recognize with a Tehran area code, and I did not answer it. But I did stand there looking at it, and when he came out of the shower, I told him his phone had rung, and I gave him the name, and I watched his face. He went still, not the same stillness as guilt. I have seen that stillness in stories I have been told, and in the faces of people caught in things. And this was different. This was the stillness of someone who has been dreading a conversation and has just run out of road. He sat down at the kitchen table. He said, "I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right time for a year, and there hasn't been a right time, and I have been a coward about it." The woman's name was Shireen. She was 34 years old, and she lived in Tehran, and she was his daughter.